bold preview here as Georgia takes on Notre Dame. And at least from my angle, I think this is one of the most compelling games of the entire weekend in the sense that I would argue it's the most unpredictable one in the sense of Penn State and Boise State. Penn State's a little more favored. Texas, Arizona, Texas is favored. Ohio State and Oregon is a little bit of a toss-up too. You've heard different varying degrees of that, but the main consensus has primarily been that Ohio State is going to get their vengeance and move on. So now it leaves you with Georgia and Notre Dame, and I'm intrigued by this matchup for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, it's been fun watching Notre Dame's evolution this season. Obviously, you go back and you think of the USC game, you think of the Northern Illinois game where they lost they lost in unprecedented fashion, and ever since then they've been kicking ass and dominating their opponents. And when you look at this team full circle, I've praised Marcus Freeman and Al Golden enough on this show, so I'm not going to get too far into the weeds with that. But you have two of the best defensive minds of all of college football on your staff. You have Mike Dunbrick, who you got from LSU, who has maximized Riley Leonard. You have Jeremiah Love, who is an absolute stud. He boasts about 1,000 rushing yards to 16 touchdowns. I think about that 98-yard touchdown that he had versus Indiana, which was incredible to watch. He's incredibly elusive. He's effective in terms of breaking tackles and really being able to diverse between the gaps and really maximize those yards. And if you ask me what Georgia's biggest problem is going to be, it's going to double down between stopping Jeremiah Love, but it's also not. I don't even think it's so much going to be about Gunnar Stockton necessarily. I think the story for Georgia really is going to be more about this Georgia wide receiving core. You can go back to all the way to the Ole Miss game or the SEC championship game, and there were a number of moments in that game where where those receivers had some pivotal drops and really didn't help out Carson Beck as much as you would like. And you go back and you watch the Georgia Texas game. Hey, Gunnar Stockton led 3 scoring drives against Texas too. Somebody who was just sitting on the bench waiting for his time to shine. So if you ask me, I think he maximized his moment there too. And obviously, one of the big storylines too, you can talk about the difference in terms of experience between Riley Leonard and Gunnar Stockton. That's obviously a clear storyline there where he has more college touchdowns than Stockton does in terms of passing attempts. Riley Leonard is over 75 touchdowns, where Gunnar Stockton is 51 attempts. So that, again, is going to be a storyline that you're sitting there too. But I think what I like about Gunnar Stockton so much is he's such a gritty player. He's the type of guy that on a 3rd and 4, he's going to be the type of guy that puts his head down and isn't afraid to get hit in the shoulder. He's going to be the type of guy where he's going to bounce off 2 linebackers and get that first down. He's going to be the type of guy where you're going to have to literally hold him accountable in the same way that you're holding Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier in that same way. So in that regard, I don't think it's as straightforward as just sitting there and saying, oh, Notre Dame has more experience, Riley Leonard. Georgia has Gunnar Stockton. Notre Dame's going to win. I don't think it's that straightforward. Although what I will say about Georgia too, and anybody who's watching this program knows that that was my pick going into the season. And as I've been watching Notre Dame, the more I'm trending away towards this Georgia pick here, because I asked myself too, Georgia is simply not the top 10 defense that we've seen over the past decade or so. In fact, they're ranked within the top 30 defensively. So that's already one setback that you already have. Teams like Texas have shown an ability to be able to work on that defense, particularly the linebacking core is probably one of the biggest question marks that you have. And Jeremiah Love can be a legitimate weapon in terms of the passing game too. So I think you have to argue that a lot of this game is going to really be predicated on who's going to be able to run the ball better. Because I think it's a big deal that Trevor Etienne is really legitimately healthy now. He tweaked he had some injury issues, and you have Nate Frazier there, who's a really good weapon too. But I think you got to imagine that Stockton's going to be used as a runner a lot more than what the general mainstream media will sit there and tell you. And Riley Leonard's kind of the same way too, in the sense of Riley Leonard's not exactly the guy that you're gonna sit there and he's gonna sling it for 300 and throw for 4 touchdowns. In fact, Notre Dame is ranked within the top, is I think 100 something in terms of passing offense. So that's never been their identity anyway. Notre Dame's identity is averaging 222 yards per game rushing the ball, which is, I believe, 15. I believe it's 15th or no, somewhere 15th or so. Really, quite frankly, been an unstoppable rushing attack thus far. I mean, even if you look at some of the opponents that they've played this year, nobody's really had much of an answer to them. And Indiana was another great example to that. Yes, they only won by 10, but if you really watch the beginning of that game, it's a lot different than kind of what the general narrative would be in terms of this Sugar Bowl. And you sit there and say the Fighting Irish had more rushing yards. The only teams that have had more rushing yards than them is UCF, who I've talked about this show with RJ Harvey and a number of those weapons there. And then Tennessee is the only other team too. So when you say to yourself, hey, only they're top 5, I was saying top 10 a couple seconds ago. So top 5 in terms of rushing attack. You have one of the best defenses in the entire country, somebody who is going to be pretty aggressive defensively, I would argue. One of the stats that I think intrigued me the most going into this game, is just how stingy this defense is. And what I mean by this is Notre Dame has the third best scoring defense in all of college football, allowing just 13.8 points a game, 18 interceptions, which is fourth most in the country. But to me, this is the real stat that caught my eye. They run cover 1 50.7% of the time, according to Pro Football Focus. I think that's the real key stat that I think needs to be discussed here. Not that Gunnar Stockton's just starting a game, not the Riley Leonard needs to throw the ball over Georgia, because I don't even think he needs to do that. To me, that's the real stat: is can Georgia's wide receivers get enough separation on these guys and be able to get enough yards after catch to legitimately make him a threat? Because one thing Georgia wide receiving core has struggled against is man coverage all year. Ole Miss did the same thing to him. Texas did the same thing to him, even in the SEC championship game. So regardless of how you look at that, to me, that's the real matchup. I mean, Gunnar Stockton is athletic enough to the point where if Notre Dame does decide to bring some extra pressure, which I do anticipate on them doing, then that will be a question of how much can they contain him, and also can Stockton be the guy to extend drives, really work those third downs, and be able to maximize points. I think red zone offense in particular is going to be a huge deal, where some of those sort of coaching decisions are really going to be the difference between who wins and who loses this game. But my last point I'm going to mention about Georgia too is I've praised Notre Dame plenty in this couple moments now. But the other thing I want to mention about Georgia too is you got Kirby Smart. And the one thing that I think Kirby Smart deserves a ton of credit for is the fact that he is excellent at making adjustments. He knows what it's like to be on this stage. 2-time national champion. He's had so much time to prepare for this game too. I think when you look at it that way too, that's also one of the reasons why I am somewhat reluctant to wholeheartedly say that Notre Dame's going to win this game, because you ask yourself, even going to the second half, you saw the adjustments that Georgia made in order to win the game versus Texas. They were able to get some pivotal third down stops. They were able to get Texas off the field when they had to. They made Quinn Ewers just uncomfortable enough to the point to make him second guess. And I think in many ways that could be something that they make Riley Leonard do as well. Because I know, at least for me, I'd probably rather Quinn Ewers than Riley Leonard. But in some regard too, they do have a similar skill set as well. So I think in many ways they're going to be preparing for them kind of in a similar way. But at the same time, you just can't underestimate what Kirby Smart has done. I think Mike Bobo, again, is a really good offensive play caller. And I think he's going to pull out of the stops for this Notre Dame game. But in terms of prediction here, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think Notre Dame is just going to squeak by here. I anticipate this game being a relatively low scoring game. I would almost argue very similar to the Georgia Kentucky game that was at the very beginning of the year, where it's going to be a lot of quarterback design runs, not too many explosive plays, and just a gritty in between the trenches type of battle. But right now, give me Notre Dame over Georgia. I just think that Jeremiah Love is going to get going just enough to be able to win this game, and I just don't think this wide receiver core is be able to do enough to help Gunnar Stockton. But I certainly think it's going to be a one possession game. It's going to come down to the wire, but I just think Notre Dame is just too balanced of a team for Georgia to be able to handle in this